Well, I think he's already jumped off the cliff, and he's probably looking for a parachute in the hope of a soft landing. I think you're being too rational. This is an emotional argument that we're dealing with, and a set of emotions in people. You're now dealing with egos, people's lives, their legacies, everything's on the line. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier. At one point, I think this was 1965 or 64, before we actually became heavily engaged on the ground in Vietnam, we lost some aircraft over Laos. At least one observation aircraft was shot down. And they convened a meeting. And in the meeting, you had all the Joint Chiefs, one of whom was Curtis LeMay. And McNamara went around and asked everybody, "You think we should do it?" He got to Curtis LeMay. This is in response to the Vietnamese. The North Vietnamese shot down one of our aircraft. And Curtis LeMay says, "Send every bomber." And everybody looks at him and says, "This man's a lunatic." And McNamara said, "What?" He said, "Send every bomber." And he said, "Well, why would you do that?" He said, "Because if you don't, they'll shoot down the next plane you send." Well, a couple of weeks later, we sent another aircraft over there and they shot it down. McNamara decided not to hold another meeting and ask anybody for suggestions. Right now, Donald Trump is beginning to think like Curtis LeMay, I suspect. He wants to send everything. Because to do nothing is unacceptable. I mean, I've tried to explain that in the context of the Israel lobby and the power and the influence they have here in the United States. And also, it's not something he's comfortable with. He wants to stand there, in this sort of Patton-esque setting and declare victory. So I think you're going to see, and I think I may have said this before. I don't know if I said it to you, but I said every B-52, every B-1, every B-2. And I think he'll concentrate as many fighter aircraft as he possibly can, and every submarine that he can lay his hands on that has missiles that can be fired, non-nuclear, and he'll give it one more shot. Because I don't think he can do the other thing, which is what we discussed, which is simply be rational and said, "Hey, we got this wrong. We're not going to win it, so we're going to stop it." One of the things that we don't have is a rational national military strategy. We don't have a national military strategy. In fact, we have nothing nationally when it comes to scientific, industrial development, or anything else. And, the British fought Napoleon Bonaparte for 20 years. And during that 20-year period, they frequently had truces, and sometimes they signed treaties, and they made peace, and then they went back to war again. But they recognized that they could not stay in a permanent state of war indefinitely. And when it was clear that they couldn't win, they stopped. And then when another opportunity presented itself, they went back in again, preferably with allies. My point is that's rationality at work. We have no rational thinking like that in Washington. We haven't had any since the end of the Second World War.
But that's if he does this, if he sends all these bombers for one last try, that will light up the Gulf. That will, we're talking about oil prices that we haven't seen yet in this war.
What's more important to Donald Trump? Israel and the Israel lobby and its power and influence in the United States to support him and protect him in office, or the Gulf Emirates, or Saudi Arabia, or Bahrain.
But look at the polls, Colonel. Like, people are starting to wake up to Israeli influence in the government. Isn't that enough political capital for Trump to pivot his strategy? Because there is the benefit of the money, that with the benefit of the money in the campaign that they spend. But at the same time, there's the cost. There's all these different candidates running without any cent from AIPAC that we haven't seen before at those levels. So isn't the tide shifting, and that could impact his decision making for the better?
I have to tell you that you've got to be careful and look at the details. You talk to Colonel Larry Wilkerson, don't you?
Yeah,
Yeah,
weekly. Yeah.
and he let me know the other day that there are funds, one set of Israeli pro-Israeli funds that are focused on ensuring complete control of the House and the Senate, and one set of funds has $160 million in it. There's another with $750 million in it. And this money is basically designed to eliminate people like Thomas Massey or Marjorie Taylor Greene and to sustain those who are willing to vote for whatever it is that Israel says is its interest or the Israel lobby tells them to support.
Mm.
That's a lot of money. And this is the sort of fallacy of so-called democracy. You know, somebody like it was Lou Dobbs used to say America has the best government money can buy, and that's a very frightening prospect. There used to be more balance between the power of the president and the Senate and the House and so forth. Money now washes all of that away. Money calls the tune in a way that we've had from time to time in our history, but I don't think it's ever been quite this bad. So I don't think you can reasonably expect what you just mentioned. I think we're stuck for the moment, and I don't think that we can bet on a wave of elections that will change anything. The other thing is that we're not a parliamentary democracy. You could have a no confidence vote in Great Britain or France or Germany or somewhere, and suddenly you get a new chancellor, new prime minister, government changes. We elect the president for 4 years. Can't change. He is the political leader as well as the head of state. So we're stuck.
Hmm. And the last thing I want to get your thoughts on is this is no longer an Iran war we're talking about. The big concern that I've had outside of today because of this news is, and the audience knows this, I've talked a lot about this, is this war shifting into multiple proxy wars. And
Mhm.
you study history and always reference history, and throughout history we've seen, especially since after the Cold War, we've seen warfare shift from direct conflict between those superpowers because of nuclear deterrence into proxy wars, and we may see a version of this in the Middle East because, or West Asia, because Iran doesn't want confrontation with you. I would think they don't want confrontation with Israel or the US again, and the US would not want to get bogged down in Iran again, and Israel doesn't want to fight Iran, especially without American support. So therefore, these wars and the Gulf can't fight Iran and vice versa. Iran doesn't want to fight the Gulf. So what happens is all these wars move to different battlefields: Lebanon with Hezbollah, Israel; Yemen with the Saudi Emirates and Iran; Syria, Iraq. And I spoke to someone yesterday who's close to the negotiating team, very, very close to the negotiating team. And they were telling me how the American strategy right now is not to, improve relations with Iran and kumbaya, things are better, and it's going to be a new chapter, which is what I was hoping for. Instead, it's going to be continued efforts to weaken Iran through um, they didn't say proxy warfare, but they said, spheres of influence in the region. And they said the three pillars the Americans are going to focus on is they're going to build pipelines away from Hormuz with the coordination with Turkey and throughout Iraq and Syria. That is the strategy that the US will be working on to weaken Iran in terms of the Strait of Hormuz, um, and weaken their influence in the region. And my worry is that Iran would not put up with it and just, they'll be like, all right, you want to play this game? And they drag the US into kinetic action because they might draw the line saying, if you're going to do anything, blockade, which is an act of war, indirect warfare, striking our proxies, our allies, axis of resistance, or anything else, or increasing sanctions, the Iranis may be the ones to respond militarily because they know this is their leverage now. It used to be America's leverage, but now it's Iran's leverage. But my worry, this does become more of a regional war.
Well, I think it is regional at this point. I would argue that. And I also wrote a piece where I talked about three wars, two hot wars, one cold war, all beginning to merge into one. Now, my point there is that you now have an alliance, de facto alliance, with enormous military and economic power and financial power. One is Russia, two, Iran, three, China. Now, these three powers alone, as Zbigniew Brzezinski back in the 1990s pointed out, can mobilize enough power on their own to drive the United States off the Eurasian continent. And we're there. That alliance is real. What's the variable? Well, the variable is Turkey, and I've mentioned this several times. Now, the Turks may not love the Shiite Iranians, but they certainly don't hate them to the point where they would destroy others, including Iranians, in a way that's designed to benefit Israel or the United States. I don't see that happening. If we try to drag Turkey into this and compel them to take up arms against Iran on behalf of Israel, I think any Turkish government that did that would be overthrown. So that means that the Turks are the silent 800-pound gorilla in the room.
Yeah.
And no one is quite sure when the 800-pound gorilla will stand up and make its presence felt. I think it will, but not yet. It'll come, but it'll come on Turkish terms. So I don't see the region being manipulated into a wider war by us. The real question is, once again, Israel. I don't know what the Israelis are going to do. If we cannot defeat Iran and we walk away from this either after another failed attempt to destroy it, we'll finally recognize we're bouncing rubble, it's time to leave, or we just leave it on our own saying this is ridiculous, we're not do this anymore, too much damage has been made. What does Israel do? And that I don't know, because I think our presence in the region is the lifeline for Israel. You remove our presence from the region, I think Israel is at very high risk of going out of business.
Colonel, thank you for your time. Always a pleasure. I'm glad you're optimistic today.
Well, one last thing, and we haven't mentioned it. I keep trying to get people to talk about it. Gaza. All of this goes back to Gaza. It's almost as though people have forgotten what's happened in Gaza.
Sure.
Hundreds of thousands of people killed and wounded, millions displaced from their homes. That's the catalyst. That's where all of this originates. No one is dealing with it. And that makes the Israelis, of course, and their agents in the United States very happy. But until you deal with that in a forthright manner, I don't see how this broader regional conflict is going to be ended.
What do you mean? What do you mean? Trump said it's all sorted. He did a deal yesterday, 2 days ago. He announced it. It's all sorted, Colonel.
Sure. Well, listen, he's got bridges for you. Across He'll sell you those bridges anytime you want to buy them.
But yeah, what's happening in Gaza is heart wrenching, and it's sad how everyone just moved on. It's completely forgotten about them, while people like Ben Gvir walk on the streets proudly saying we will settle all of Gaza very openly now, something that would never happen years ago.
But keep in mind, when it was time to stand up to Israel on the issue, who stood up? Where are all the Sunni Arabs? What have they done? The Shiite Iranians, the Shiite Arabs, and Hezbollah, they stood up. Gaza fought. Where are their allies? Where are the Egyptians?
Why didn't China do more? I know you have to go, but that's a good question.
I think the
Never
Chinese,
thought of it.
the Chinese are on the other side of the world. They're not going to intervene unless it's a vital strategic interest. They would certainly contribute to any peacekeeping effort. I'm sure of that. They would be happy to support rebuilding, invest in infrastructure and all that kind of business. But the Chinese don't meddle in other people's affairs. They
Sure,
make that
sure.
very clear. So what about the Europeans? Nobody has stood up except the Shiites and Hamas, and of course the allies, the Houthis. It's really a sad commentary in my view, because if you
Yeah.
talk to them privately, the Iranians, so forth, as far as they're concerned, people like MBS and others have betrayed Islam.